Thaddeus and Valencia Blackwood epitomized the American dream, living in an affluent suburb with all the trappings of success. Their house was a masterpiece of symmetry, with a manicured lawn, freshly painted shutters, and a driveway that housed matching luxury cars. To neighbors, they were the embodiment of ambition and prosperity, a golden couple. Thaddeus, 37, was a senior investment manager, known for his sharp suits and sharper instincts in Boston's financial district. Valencia, 35, was equally accomplished, working as a pharmaceutical researcher with a reputation for brilliance. Together, they hosted elegant dinner parties, traveled to exotic locales, and projected an image of seamless harmony. Yet, the Blackwoods were enigmatic. Their decision not to have children was an anomaly in the family-oriented community, but they brushed off inquiries with practiced responses about career focus and personal freedom. Their neighbors accepted this without question, envying their seemingly carefree, sophisticated life. The surface perfection masked a growing unease. The Blackwoods' relationship had become transactional, more like a business partnership than a marriage. They rarely spoke beyond logistical matters, dinner reservations, home renovations, and their meticulously planned vacations. In private, their home felt hollow, a museum of achievements devoid of warmth. The art that adorned their walls, the imported furniture, and the luxurious kitchen appliances were props in a facade they maintained for themselves as much as for others. Their conversations dwindled into silence, their eyes always on their phones or laptops seeking distraction. It was in this silence that the darkness began to take root. Thaddeus was born into privilege, the only child of a tax attorney and a real estate agent in Connecticut. His upbringing was a study in ambition, every activity and academic pursuit geared toward his future success. At Dartmouth, he thrived in the competitive environment, honing his analytical skills and developing a reputation for ruthlessness. Valencia's childhood was different. Raised in Rhode Island by academically driven parents, she excelled in science from an early age. Her father, a physicist, and her mother, a biochemist, fostered her natural brilliance, ensuring she had every opportunity to excel. By her teenage years, she was already conducting independent research at MIT. Their shared drive for success made them natural allies, though their ambitions came from different places. Thaddeus sought power, while Valencia pursued perfection. Thaddeus and Valencia's paths crossed at an exclusive pharmaceutical investment summit in 1995, a venue teeming with ambition and intellect. Valencia was presenting her groundbreaking research on cutting-edge drug therapies, captivating the audience with her precision and poise. Thaddeus, representing a leading investment firm, was there scouting biotech ventures. Their first interaction was electrifying, a meeting of minds as much as personalities. Over drinks at the after-party, they discussed strategy, innovation, and their shared disdain for mediocrity. By the end of the night, it was clear they were destined to be more than acquaintances. Within weeks, they were inseparable, both recognizing in the other a rare, formidable partner. Their relationship was built on shared goals rather than romance. When they decided to marry, it was a pragmatic choice, a merger of two equally driven forces. The ceremony was a minimalist affair, attended by a handful of close associates rather than family or friends. The early years of their marriage were a whirlwind of career milestones and financial growth. They operated like a well-oiled machine, each playing a defined role in their shared pursuit of success. For a time, their partnership flourished in its efficiency. But the absence of genuine emotional intimacy left cracks that even their achievements couldn't fill. Despite their outward success, Thaddeus and Valencia Blackwood were plagued by a deep void neither could articulate. Their carefully constructed lives lacked spontaneity or joy. Conversations became robotic, their shared dreams reduced to hollow rituals. The emptiness weighed heavily on both, yet instead of addressing it, they sought escape. Thaddeus channeled his frustration into high-stakes investments, while Valencia immersed herself in obscure, unsanctioned medical experiments. The absence of emotional connection drove them into increasingly darker corners of their minds. Thaddeus's late-night internet explorations led him to the dark web, a place where morality seemed obsolete. Initially drawn to the thrill of anonymity, he discovered forums where the unimaginable was traded and discussed. Valencia, ever the curious scientist, joined him in these secret online excursions. Together they ventured deeper, emboldened by their shared fascination. Their twisted curiosity soon found a focus, control over another human being, justified in their minds. minds as a psychological and scientific experiment. The Blackwoods' obsession became a shared secret that reinvigorated their faltering relationship. They spent hours devising plans, pooling their intellect and resources to create a twisted project. What began as an intellectual exercise morphed into a grotesque reality. They justified their actions with clinical detachment, dismissing the moral implications as irrelevant. The excitement of their secret endeavor brought them closer than they had been in years, forming a bond around their dark desires. The Blackwoods approached the creation of the basement with the same precision they had applied to their careers. They justified its construction as a necessary element of their secret experiment, transforming a disturbing idea into a tangible project. Thaddeus oversaw the logistics, commissioning specialized contractors under the guise of building a wine cellar and personal gym. Valencia, with her medical and scientific knowledge, sketched detailed plans to optimize the space for her dark purposes. The final blueprint included soundproof walls, advanced surveillance systems, and medical equipment to maintain control over their intended captive. To the outside world, the Blackwoods were merely modernizing their home. The contractors they hired never questioned the specifications, blinded by hefty paychecks. Every feature served a sinister function, from the reinforced locks to the hidden entrances. By the time the project was completed, the basement was not just a room, but a fortress of control. Adona Villamore's story began with hope. A hard-working young woman from the Philippines, she had been promised a job in the United States that would support her family. Upon arriving, however, she was intercepted by human traffickers who sold her into the hands of the Blackwoods. Adona was brought to their home under the pretense of being a domestic helper, but her freedom was stripped away almost immediately. She was led to the basement, a stark, cold space with no windows and an oppressive sense of isolation. The realization of her captivity was a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her captors presented themselves as clinical and detached. Valencia approached her as a subject in an experiment, coldly observing her reactions to various forms of psychological manipulation. Thaddeus was more overtly cruel, using intimidation and threats to instill fear. Adona quickly understood that her survival depended on her ability to endure and observe. The basement was no longer just a room in the Blackwoods' home. It had become a meticulously constructed hell. Adona's imprisonment was a dark and suffocating reality where every aspect of her life was controlled. The space was clinical and sterile, designed for one purpose: to break her spirit and submit her to Valencia and Thaddeus's twisted experiment. The room was windowless and cold, with only dim, artificial lighting that never gave her a sense of day or night. Soundproof walls ensured that her cries and pleas would go unheard. The Blackwoods had ensured that the space would keep her isolated, both physically and psychologically. Her basic needs were met just enough to keep her alive, but beyond that, every moment was a psychological game. Valencia's role was as the scientist, conducting experiments designed to dehumanize Adona and push her to her breaking point. Valencia would monitor her reactions to extreme isolation, sensory deprivation, and psychological manipulation. The experiments began innocently enough, simple tests of endurance and obedience, but quickly they evolved into cruel, degrading acts meant to strip Adona of her dignity. She was often deprived of food, water, and sleep, her every action scrutinized and punished for any sign of defiance. Thaddeus, the brute of the pair, used physical intimidation and violence to enforce control. He would appear suddenly, his presence alone a reminder of the physical and mental torment she endured. His method was blunt, threatening, belittling, and often brutal. Adona learned quickly that while she could sometimes outsmart the clever and calculating Valencia, she could never predict or avoid the cruelty of Thaddeus. But despite the horror of the basement dungeon, Adona remained remarkably resilient. Every time she was beaten down, both physically and emotionally, she rose again, her mind growing sharper with each ordeal. Her strength became not only her survival mechanism, but her weapon. The Blackwoods, at least to the outside world, were a couple of high society. They were known for their charitable endeavors, successful business ventures, and pristine public appearances. To everyone around them, they were the perfect couple, the epitome of grace, power, and wealth. But behind closed doors, the carefully constructed facade began to crack. It was the pressure of their dual lives, the public one of sophistication and respectability, and the private one filled with dark, twisted secrets, that started to erode the Blackwoods' control. Thaddeus, whose arrogance once kept him insulated from consequences, began making careless mistakes. In public, he became short-tempered and irritable, unable to conceal the strain his double life placed on him. Valencia, who had once been a calm and composed presence in all matters, was losing her grip on her carefully crafted identity. Her obsession with the experiment began to take a toll on her mental health. She became distracted, her thoughts consumed by Adona's suffering and the need to continue her scientific pursuit. Her public appearances became less frequent, and when she did appear, there was an unsettling edge to her interactions. In the house, the tensions between the Blackwoods reached a boiling point. The arguments that were once private now became loud, heated confrontations. The couple began to turn on each other, Valencia accusing Thaddeus of being too reckless with their plan, and Thaddeus accusing her of losing focus and making them vulnerable. Their trust in each other was slowly fraying, and they no longer operated in the seamless, synchronized manner they once did. Even the outside world began to notice the change. Their previously impeccable reputation began to falter. Colleagues, friends, and even distant family members began to question the Blackwoods' behavior, noting that something wasn't right. Whispers started, and the once infallible mask of their perfection was beginning to slip. Adona's resilience was not just a survival mechanism, it was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, a form of quiet rebellion against the Blackwoods' efforts to break her. For all the psychological, physical, and emotional torture she endured, Adona refused to be completely subdued. The basement was designed to erase her identity, to strip away her sense of self until she became nothing but a broken shell of a person. But through every moment of agony, Adona clung to her sense of individuality with a fierceness that even Valencia and Thaddeus couldn't anticipate. Her resilience was anchored in the small acts of defiance she could muster, each one like a tiny flame in the cold, dark abyss of her imprisonment. She refused to beg for mercy, no matter how many times Thaddeus beat her. When Valencia tried to force her to speak or perform tasks that degraded her, Adona remained silent. That silence became her shield, a refusal to let her captors control her in ways they expected. One of the small yet significant acts of defiance was her quiet reflection during her rare moments of solitude. When she was alone, Adona would close her eyes and think of her family. Memories of her childhood, the warmth of her parents' home, and the smell of her mother's cooking became the mental sanctuary she could escape to. Even though the Blackwoods tried to erase her past and break her down, these memories anchored her and reminded her of who she was beyond the walls of the basement. As the weeks turned into months, Adona's mental sharpness grew. She started memorizing the layout of the house, the timing of the Blackwoods' routines, and their patterns of behavior. She listened closely for any weaknesses in their plans, moments when they might become careless or distracted. She knew that her survival depended on her ability to be patient and strategic. Every day she spent in the basement, she learned something new about her captors, and it became clear to her that the key to her freedom wasn't just physical escape, it was psychological resilience. One of the most important steps in her journey was maintaining her sense of hope. Adona knew that hope, no matter how small, was essential. It was what kept her from giving up. It was what allowed her to endure even when her body was broken and her mind was strained. She knew that one day somehow she would escape, and when that day came, she would not just escape physically, she would reclaim her life, her dignity, and her future. The day everything changed started like any other, but for Adona, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would bring her the possibility of freedom and ultimately justice. The Blackwoods had grown complacent. After months of meticulously controlling every aspect of Adona's life, they had let their guard down. Thaddeus and Valencia, intoxicated by their own power, had become careless. This negligence proved to be their greatest mistake. It all began with a single oversight. Thaddeus, in his arrogance, left the basement door unlocked for a brief moment after a routine check. Normally, every aspect of the house was monitored. Every door, every camera, every movement. But on this day, the door was slightly ajar. For Adona, it was as if the universe itself had opened a window for her, and she wasn't going to miss it. She had spent months in captivity, her mind growing sharper with each passing day. She had learned the layout of the house, the patterns of the guards, and the movements of the Blackwoods. Every time Thaddeus or Valencia came down to the basement, Adona took mental notes. She knew that any attempt at escape would have to be swift, precise, and silent. Now, standing near the unlocked door, her heart raced. She knew this was her moment, but she she also knew that she could never afford to be caught. There would be no second chances. If she failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. With trembling hands, she grabbed the key that had been left carelessly on the table and approached the door. The cool metal of the key felt foreign in her hand, yet it was also strangely empowering. She knew that behind that door lay her one chance at freedom. She had prepared for this moment, and now she had to make it count. As she slowly turned the key in the lock, she felt a surge of adrenaline flood through her. Every muscle in her body was taut with anticipation. The door creaked open, but she moved with the quiet, practiced stealth she had honed over months of torment. For a moment, she simply stood in the hallway, listening for any sound that might betray her. The house was eerily silent. The Blackwoods were still on their regular schedule, and if she moved quickly enough, they wouldn't even know she was gone until it was too late. Adona crept through the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She moved like a shadow, darting from one room to another. She knew where every camera was, where the guards would be patrolling, and where she could hide if anyone came near. Her body was on high alert, and every step she took was a calculated risk. As she approached the front door, her pulse quickened. This was it, the final barrier between her and freedom. She could see the outside world through the glass, the night sky, the stars shining above. She reached for the doorknob with a trembling hand, holding her breath. With a final soft click, the door opened. For a brief moment, everything stood still. Then, without a second thought, Adona stepped out into the cold night air. She took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air fill her lungs as she ran, her feet pounding against the ground. She didn't stop to look back. She ran because it was her only choice, because it was the only way she could ensure her survival. Adona didn't know where she was going. She only knew that she couldn't stop. Eventually, she found refuge in a nearby house. The family inside called the police, who arrived swiftly. The authorities immediately understood the gravity of the situation, and the Blackwoods house was soon surrounded. The nightmare that Adona had endured for so long was finally over, but the world would soon discover that this was just the beginning. The Blackwoods' twisted, dark secrets were about to be exposed to the world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The revelation of Adona's escape sent shockwaves through the media, and what followed was a series of events that no one could have predicted. The Blackwoods, once seen as a perfect couple with a flawless reputation, were now the faces of depravity and cruelty. Their empire, built on manipulation, deceit, and power, was crumbling before their eyes. As the authorities investigated their home, the full extent of their cruelty was revealed. Hidden rooms, medical equipment designed for torture, and volumes of journals detailing their twisted experiments on Adona were uncovered. It became clear that what had once been a well-curated image of wealth and success was nothing more than a facade, a carefully crafted lie meant to mask the horrors they had inflicted on an innocent young woman. The media coverage exploded. News outlets and journalists scrambled to report the shocking details of the Blackwoods' crimes. Their once impeccable status in society, their wealth, and their social influence were now irrelevant. Their pasts, painted in glossed-over strokes of charity work and social gatherings, were torn apart by the truth. What had once seemed like a picture-perfect life was now a grotesque nightmare. Adona's testimony during the trial was one of the most pivotal moments. She bravely spoke of the horrors she had endured, recounting her suffering with a courage that left everyone in the courtroom speechless. Her voice was steady, though the weight of her experience was heavy in every word she spoke. She didn't just speak for herself, she spoke for all the other victims who had been silenced by fear. Her courage resonated far beyond the courtroom, inspiring countless survivors of abuse to come forward and seek justice. In the end, Thaddeus and Valencia Blackwood were convicted of their heinous crimes and sentenced to life in prison. Their assets were seized, their names tarnished forever. They had gone from being the most influential couple in town to the most despised. Their world had collapsed, and they were now left to face the consequences of their cruelty. For Adona, the road to healing was far from easy. The scars, both physical and emotional, would take years to fade, but the most important thing was that she had survived. The nightmares would never fully leave her, but she knew that she had the power to take back her life. She became a voice for those who had suffered in silence, using her painful past as a platform to speak out against abuse and trafficking. Her story became one of survival, resilience, and hope. The Blackwoods' fall from grace was not just a personal tragedy, it was a reminder to the world that appearances can be deceiving and that darkness can lurk behind the most perfect facades. But it was also a reminder that even in the face of such darkness, there is always the possibility for hope and change. Thank you for following Adona's journey from captivity to freedom and the ultimate unraveling of the Blackwood's dark empire. What are your thoughts on the incredible resilience Adona showed throughout her ordeal? How do you think her story will inspire others to stand up against abuse and fight for justice? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found Adona's story inspiring, and make sure to subscribe to our channel to follow more powerful stories like hers. Your support helps us continue to bring meaningful content to light. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter the darkness you face, there is always a way out.